Scores of Asheville minors get into legal trouble every year, and Buncombe Alternatives is working to keep them out of the judicial system, get back into school, and set them on a positive track.
We don't call them bad kids.
We don't call them bad kids,
They're
right?
not really.
And
Ultimately, it's just how people perceive them. People
Correct.
perceive our clients as bad kids because they're in trouble. But really, I say they're normal teenagers.
Probably more normal.
They're probably the most normal teenagers.
I'm Matt Peiken, and this is The Overlook, a daily podcast about the news, arts, issues, and trends of Asheville, North Carolina. My guests today are Karen Peerson, the Executive Director, and Juan Holladay, Director of Program Services and Community Development with Buncombe Alternatives. We talk about teens who come to them from inside and outside the court system, the details of their community service through this program, and how restorative justice looks through the lens of Buncombe Alternatives Teen Court.
I am an American woodsman, my fortune for to seek. I am an American woodsman, as plain as day can be.
Naturalist John J. Audubon has his life and work put to music in The American Woodsman, getting its world premiere at the Wortham Center for the Performing Arts. Asheville playwright and director Lori Pandy built the story and songs from Audubon's journals. A cast of operatic vocalists and a live musical duo brings them all to life. The American Woodsman opens June 23rd and runs 8 performances through July 2nd. For tickets and more information, go to worthamarts.org. I began this conversation with Karen Peerson and Juan Holladay by asking Karen about how Buncombe Alternatives first developed.
It was based upon the need in the community for a program that would divert troubled youth or youth who had misdemeanor offenses. So it would divert these youth from the court system and not overburden the court system with diversion cases. And what I mean by that, because I didn't understand it, diversion cases would be a simple misdemeanor like disorderly conduct.
Usually a first-time offense.
Correct. It was developed for first-time offenders. One of the programs was.
What was happening to first-time offenders before a program such as Buncombe Alternatives? I know there are programs like this elsewhere around the country. Give us an example of the kinds of cases that these kids that come into your program that were in the judicial system before your program.
Sure. Some things have changed since we've been here, but pretty much stagnant since the time it was developed. So what was happening to the youth in the 80s was diversion cases. An example would be kids getting in multiple fights at school and uncontrollable behavior, if you will. They've exhausted in-school suspension. I know when I was younger, in-school suspension was a big deal, but out-of-school suspension was even bigger when I was younger. So what was happening now is overburdening the school system. So OSS, ISS would be exhausted. This youth would then be diverted to the court system for disorderly conduct or fighting, if you will. And then they would bog down the system because they would go before the judge, and what takes precedence is a higher assault or a higher offense, if you will. And so you would just see the repetition there.
You're getting into a question that I had. So are these kids who, before a program such as Buncombe Alternatives, they would get into a court system that wasn't equipped to deal with them, and inevitably would the consequences of their action exceed the action? Were they in a system that was almost too harsh for what they did on the street?
Yes, sometimes that would be the case. So it would bog down the system for sure, both school and court. And so these diversion programs in the 80s, like Scared Straight was back then. These kinds of programs were put into existence, I think, during Reagan, something like that.
Yeah.
I might be aging myself here. And so they were phenomenal programs and did their job correctly. But then when everything became a problematic political situation with Scared Straight, then they started to look at programs and developing programs more walking the line like ours, as far as we wouldn't scare the kids. Instead, it was more restorative, less punitive, where Scared Straight was more punitive. You walk them through a jail and they're scared to death, so they're never going to do it again. It backfired just a little bit.
What I think I've observed from what you've told me over the years is that punitive versus restorative is basically the change, right? So initially you have this kind of trying to change people's behavior through fear, and then churning towards let's try to help change people's behavior through incentivizing, saying more, hey, like for instance, my program is a community service program. So when a kid comes through my program, I do an interview with them initially to get them into the program, and I tell them, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't necessarily matter what got you here. I want to concentrate more on your future. Where are you headed from here? And let's get you involved in some community service that will help you see that you're a part of the community and make you want to be a part of the community and appreciate yourself as a part of the community.
Back up a second. We haven't established how kids come into your program. I imagine there's two ways. One, it's through the courts, which is not necessarily voluntary on the kids or the family's part. And then I can imagine, and tell me if I'm wrong here, that parents see a track that their children are going down and want to intervene before things get into a law enforcement level. Are both those routes into your program?
So I would say yes on both those accords. However, I would say that around 75 to 80% of the youth that are involved with us, no offense to parents, I'm a parent myself, Juan's a parent, there's a parental involvement in this. And that's a little different than we've seen in the past. So that's a number one factor. Again, we have several programs. And so the one Juan is speaking about, that kind of alludes to what his program is dealing with. But first-time offenders in this program, Buncombe County Teen Court, in this county, the Teen Court program, the youth who is sentenced or committed the offense has to admit guilt to come into that program. So this is a cool part of this program and why I took this job. Because prior to this, I worked for another nonprofit, names unannounced, for 20 years also. I'm a nonprofit junkie trying to change the world one county at a time. But with that being said, the neat thing about the Teen Court program when I started was this kid was not in here not knowing what they had done wrong. And they wanted to make right their wrongdoing as swiftly and as quickly as possible, and so did the parent. Okay, so their diversion program lasted about at the limit of 3 months, where Juan's program, the community service restitution program, can last 3 months to a year longer. So they can be on probation. They're a heavier weight, if you will, a harder offense.
Yeah, they actually go before a judge usually in my program.
Yeah.
I do get diversion cases as well who don't go before a judge, but yeah, my program will deal with slightly more serious charges.
Give us a range of the kinds of backgrounds that brought these kids into your attention and program.
Possession of marijuana, maybe bringing alcohol to class, maybe hitting someone, maybe someone's bullied and they'll hit back after months of passivism, whatever. There's all types of situations that morally it's a lot of gray area, a lot of, yeah, that's a pretty normal thing for a kid to do, but yeah, you got caught. And I'm sure maybe a lot of times kids will, it's like what they get caught for is not their worst offense.
I see. So the things you're talking about are happening in schools.
In schools, a lot. Mostly through school is where I think our referrals
What's interesting to me is back when I was in school, 70s and 80s, no kids, no matter what they did in school, were going into the criminal justice system.
Exactly.
You're correct.
It was treated in school to whatever degree it was or not. Being bullied, you just had to deal with it. There was no movement to...
And you didn't have anyone to tell.
Yeah.
In some cases, yeah.
Yeah, and there were coaches and teachers who were aware of things and to varying degrees did something or nothing. So your program is designed to stop or at least blunt these kids who are, quote, offending within a school environment, not exclusively, but largely within a school environment to curb that behavior. Do the parents, do the families and schools and the youth, are they all aware that if not for your program, whatever they have been doing is going to lead to some intervention or interaction with the criminal justice system?
The parents and family are not always aware. The people who are around us are, or we would not still be here.
What do you mean the people around us?
As far as funders, the county, DJJ, Department of Juvenile Justice, we work with mental health, schools, as you said.
Because I would imagine a lot of these kids, and maybe this is just a stereotype exacerbated by pop culture and movies, but I would imagine a lot of these kids are resistant to, I don't need you telling me how to be.
Of course, yeah. No, a lot of the kids are like, it wasn't even like that bad. I just did this and that, and now I'm in trouble. They're rationalizing it. And in some cases, I totally agree with them. There's a few cases where I've had where somebody's been bullied for a year and they finally punch that person, and it's, yeah, you get in trouble when you do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. You get in trouble. Do I disagree with what I'm like? Are you getting picked on anymore? They're like, no, I say nothing. You know what I'm saying? But it's kind of like some cases it's like that wasn't necessarily immoral, but you will get in trouble for it, and you have to watch out for that. And that's the world that we live in and the reality that we have right now. So that's why they're in the court system.
That's what I was just going to ask. What changed in our culture to where these things in the 70s and 80s there was no element of the court system or law enforcement being involved? What changed to bring that involvement?
Columbine is my understanding. They got officers in SROs.
SROs in the school system.
In the school
For sure,
systems.
school shootings had a lot to do with it. But
SROs?
School resource officers.
Okay.
So to answer 3 questions that you've asked that haven't been answered, one is I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, and I think the biggest thing, and I'll show you an example that I utilize often to explain this chaotic time, is my Cougar XR7. I would drive down my neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina, and my brother would take his baseball bat and nail someone's mailbox. And eventually word would get back that it was us. It was the Kowalski kids. They're no good. Just kidding. My dad would march us down there. And for the rest of the summer, every week, we were oscillating back and forth, mowing grass, right? Now it's a federal offense. You don't even know your neighbor 90% of the time. So that person is taking out a felony charge because a mailbox is a piece of federal property.
Yeah.
And so is a bus. So now crimes where like you used to give wedgies on the bus, you do that now and some parent gets really ticked off, they have no problem turning them over to the court.
That's part of our culture too, where let's take a sledgehammer to something that might need a minimal tap.
And we've seen it, I've seen it, and I know Juan has now. And I'll give you another example, not just the felony offenses that we're talking about or asking about and why it looks so different today. And then I want to talk about raise the age. So don't let me forget this time, because that's the biggest thing. And everyone needs to know about this, because North Carolina was the last state in the country behind New York to raise the age. So
raise the age of
youth being served in the juvenile justice system. They were served at 16 as adults for those same offense I was just speaking of, because they were a felony. So I want to piggyback on that in 1 second. The other example is you mentioned smoking pot. Okay. Yeah. We live in a country where some states it's legal, some states it's not. At any state, you shouldn't be smoking pot on federal property anyway, but no one's educated in this matter because you've got the cool culture of movies and you're smoking pot out behind the buses before you go play football. Not that I'm just using this as an example.
Okay.
But
we'll take your word for it.
But this is a real live example from about 18 years ago when I first took this job. There was a kid who came through the school system. His dad worked for Buncombe County Schools. He went to Asheville City Schools. He was a star football player. And you probably see where I'm going with this, okay?
I see an after-school movie special.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so everyone thinks, and I'm okay talking about this because it doesn't bother me. Some people might cringe right now. But everyone thinks our program is developed for inner-city black kids. We live in the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. You're not from here. I'm not from here. Juan's not from here.
Not from here.
Okay, inner-city black kids in our community are the farthest thing from our statistics in most of our programs. Now, we might have a year where a high volume of male black youth come through our program. It is a statistic. But if you look at the black kids in our community, it is a small volume in comparison, okay? So stay with me on that. So this kid, a white upper middle class kid whose mom's a doctor, his dad works for the school system.
A success story.
A success story,
by
right?
all other measures.
Other siblings. He has a scholarship to numerous college campuses around the state, NC State and Wake Forest were his 2 top choices. He was a straight A student. He gets busted smoking pot after a game by a SRO, unnamed, who does not like this family at all, does not like the kid. Charges him, not the other kids, charges him. And not only does he lose his scholarship, he's tried now because a big deal was made out of this. And so now not only is his collegiate record, his high school record, everything has just turned in a second because this kid smoked pot. He should not have been doing this, but they were celebrating a win in their senior year. So he spends the whole summer in our program, loses his scholarship. They don't want him. He's tainted now. The kid goes on to be okay, but I've seen him since, and I've seen the family since. It was not a good situation. And that's an example of where we think our program and raise the age now You can't go backwards. But now we are seeing these same crimes, and the kids are not being tried as an adult. They're not losing their scholarships. They're like, you know what? I screwed up. Let me make it right. And that's where we are the bridge between the schools and the courts.
How many kids a year come through your program?
Our agency alone, we serve about 100 to 150 families on a given year.
So this is funded through the county?
All kinds of funding, mainly through what's called juvenile crime prevention dollars, and this is handed down through the state. So I work directly with state officials and the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council. There's about, I think there's 101 right now across the state of North Carolina.
The Overlook is going live. My first live podcasting event features a conversation with Asheville Symphony music director Darko Buderitz. Black Asheville leaders tell us what they think about the city's commitment and progress toward reparations, and the resident rogues will talk about and perform songs from their upcoming record. That's 3 episodes of The Overlook in one evening. The Overlook Live happens Wednesday, September 27th at the Wortham Center. Tickets will be $30 when they go on sale to the public, but anyone joining my Patreon campaign in June gets in free. Go to patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast.
So families aren't paying for the program?
No.
Okay.
No.
So give me a sense, Juan, you run a specific program. What kinds of things are you doing? Talk about the specific interactions and, I guess, interventions you're doing with young people, individually or in groups.
So when I get a referral from the court system, I contact that family and I bring them in for an interview, intake, we call it. And I basically try to build rapport at that moment of saying, hey, I'm not really here to judge you for why you're here. And half the time, I'm not going to read everything in the file unless I'll read it, but I'm not looking for a reason to judge you.
You're not looking for red flags.
No. Oh, actually, I am looking for red flags. If I see no red flags, then I'll glaze over some things.
If they come in smelling like pot
I'm just saying,
or smelling like alcohol, we pretty much judge them immediately on that fact.
Specific red flags I look for is like if they have a sexual offense, I have to be aware of that. Like if somebody accidentally killed somebody, I just want to know what's the gravity of the situation. I had a kid one time that hit somebody with a car. So I want to know that.
And it decides where we place them in our programming.
Yeah. If they've done breaking and entering, I need to know that because that will change what location I'm allowed to have them complete their hours at. But in general, I'm not trying to judge them. So I'm just trying to look at what are the most important parts of their paperwork to look at. And then the rest, I'm like, you know what? I want to get to know this person kind of like person to person and more just let them know that ultimately, as long as you didn't kill anybody or do something of this higher gravity, then to me, you're a normal teenager.
So what happens with these normal teenagers?
Well, what I'll tell them initially is, look, in some cases, it's better to get in trouble now, and that way you realize that you can get in trouble, as opposed to not getting in trouble and you think you're slick, and then you turn 20 and then you get in trouble. Now you're in a whole different system. So then I'll do the intake, and then we'll decide on a location. So we do community service at Manna. We do community service at Rathbun House. We also do Lake Julian and Root Cause Farm, and then Shiloh Community Garden. Those are our main locations that we use.
It's hard to raise money for youth in Juan's program because sometimes they are habitual offenders. Adjudicated youth are harder to serve. To lower recidivism in any county is a hard thing, and that's going to be the reoffending of a child. And that's what Juan's program does. We want to keep these kids out of reoffending in the future.
That's what I was getting at. I was asking, what do? You mentioned these varied outlets where they perform community service. But where do you intervene in a way that makes a difference in their behavior?
So that's what I'm saying is psychologically, like as soon as they come in, I say, let's look at the future. You got here because you got caught. You're not that bad a kid. I don't want you to have this thought in your mind that I'm just a bad kid and I'm always going to be a bad kid. That's what needs to change. What needs to change is let's do some community service. And I usually try to work either as hard or harder as everyone else because I'm not trying to be a taskmaster.
You're not like the picture of the warden standing there and watching the people work.
And partly because that's just boring. Who really wants to do that? And if I do that, they're not going to have any rapport with me. So I try to show them that we are equal to a large degree. Now, I am the boss, right? And there are certain rules that they have to comply with, but I try to make the list of rules short and clear and easy to remember, and then be like, and now that as long as we're in agreement with the rules, now let's just work on doing the actual community service. And what I want to happen, and what I do think happens sometimes, is that they see themselves working and helping other people. That's usually how I choose these places. Is if you're working at Manna, you can tell that your contribution is having an effect. Right. You just see it, literally see it.
But is that what changes behavior? You were talking about there's recidivism, and there you see people. I imagine a number of people come into your program more than once. So
a few. It doesn't happen all that often.
Okay.
Family members.
What changes behavior beyond just packing goods at Manna Food Bank?
I don't know.
I
but
do.
One thing I do know is that if somebody comes in and I'm having them complete a task that seems to have zero or some sort of small connection to community, then they're just going to be like, you're just making me work for no reason. And that doesn't help at all.
That's what you said. You do know the answer to that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that question because I get asked that a lot as well besides funding. But part of that is, again, in the years that I've been here, in the last 10 years, we've been utilizing what's called the Juvenile Justice Treatment Continuum. Is something that was brought to us by health provider Meridian, I believe it was. I don't know, they peeled out pretty quick when they figured out how much it was going to cost. But we kept it going in this county thanks to our chief at the time and now Chief Clement. But so the Juvenile Justice Treatment Continuum pulled main providers, like Juan said, the sexual offender program here in Buncombe County in Western North Carolina. And then
Children's Hope Alliance, isn't it?
Children's Hope Alliance, yeah. And then ourselves, we're a community service provider, restorative service, and then the teen court for diversion. So we have wraparound services. But we come to the table once a week, Juan does once a week, to meet with court, school, mental health, and any other substance abuse issues or family issues. So it's not just us out there outside of our wheelhouse. We stay in our wheelhouse. We stay in our lane is like what we like to call it. Yeah. But there's a lot of times that we're divulged and we sign contracts as staff when we do intakes from the point of intake to the point of the completion of service. We call it termination in our line of work. I hate that because it sounds like we killed the kid. But basically, from the point of impact, we can identify sometimes better off than the parents, the mental health provider, and sometimes the court appointee. They'll divulge to Juan, myself, or any other staff that something's going on in the home, something's going on somewhere else. I need help. They
feel more able to communicate sometimes with us because
we're not wearing
concentrating
a suit.
on if they walk in the room and it's, oh, you're here because you're in trouble. You're not getting out of this. That kind of attitude, they'll shut down.
Yeah.
If you come in, hey, we're just going to go over here and pick some fruit and help some other people out. And it's, oh, okay, no one's concentrating on me. All I got to do is follow these rules and I can go do something. And then they'll start talking about their day, what happened. Oftentimes, I will get higher compliance. Like I'll have a client that in every other area, they're like, he's not completing his court-ordered therapy sessions. But I'm like, all I have to report is he's doing a great job in community service. I don't know why that is.
Sometimes we get that.
And it happens a lot.
None of us are therapeutic licensed staff, but we work side by side and hand in hand.
And we get training
on a regular basis.
Kind of area,
so we have key identifiers. And so what we do when we're working with them, Juan meets with the people that I mentioned earlier, court counselors, all the people in the JJTC program, right? We all come to the table. And this came back so that we wouldn't drop anyone through any cracks. And a lot of it happens when there's staff turnover at the court, which is happening right now, or lack of funding, where you have to service less youth. I always go find funds somewhere else when the state doesn't provide or the county doesn't provide, because this is a service that can't go away. We might not be there. We might not be the face, but the program itself can't go away.
What I'm asking is, how does your program, it's designed to change behaviors, right? That's what you're ultimately trying to do.
Correct, by making better choices. So we do school-based teen court, not just court. We do school-based teen court as well. The interesting thing is now to educate these families so they really understand what is happening if they offend again. Juan will have them mandatory do community service and be a juror to decide a sanction handed down, a list of things, obligations they have to do now as a first-time offender. So now you've got this client that is mixed into the group, non-identified, who comes into a jury pool, like you and I would, and makes a decision on another child's offense, and decides the fate of what they have to do. So the families come and get educated on the court system by participating in teen court. And it gives them validation. Oh, look, that person has the same crime. Why are they able to do this program?
Is there a set number of hours kids have to?
The judge will determine the hours. So usually it's between 20 and 100. It's usually 20.
Wait, so those are cases that aren't coming from the school. That's coming from the court
Correct.
system. But for the instances where kids are coming to you not from the court system,
They'll
you
never
said-
come to me, not from the court
Oh,
system.
they don't?
No.
They'll do teen court through
Okay.
just the school.
So our
But
school-based
for me,
program
I
is a
just wanted to
little
be-
different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to clarify because I think a vast majority of people who would be listening to this don't know that. So the people who are coming to your program to do community service all come from the court
But they
system.
could come from a school. So like an SRO could say, hey, look, this kid beat some kid over the head with a lock.
school to court
lock.
to me.
It originates in school, but just trying to be clear though.
Yeah.
So it's the court system that's deciding how many hours of community
Yeah.
service that these kids have to perform, and that they go through your program to
Fulfill that.
service.
That's what service I provide.
And recently, like an example of that, because I'm a big example person, if a kid is walking downtown and they all bust out a window, right? But only one kid gets caught and he's got restitution now for that window, $350, level 1, level 2 diversion case that comes to Juan. At this point, we explain those other kids back in the day, they might be 16, 17, 18, they can just write a check to the court. But you're 15, you broke the window, and now you've got to make this right.
Yeah, your parents can't pay for it. You don't have a job.
You have to work it off from us.
You
And
know.
we used to be $5.25 back in the day. And
We
now
used to
we're
pay $5. Now we pay $7.
Yeah, now we pay $7.
So these kids who are working at Manna and these other places are getting
Some
$7
of
an
them,
hour.
if they owe restitution, if they like
This money goes to
damaged
Correct.
some
Gotcha.
property or somebody.
I understand.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, when these kids are in your program, Juan, they're also through other agencies. They might be doing counseling and
Correct.
other things.
They
So,
might have mental health support.
gotcha. So, and that's where you're working in concert with these other.
That's where
Correct.
we meet once a
Great
week at
word,
the table
concert.
in person or in Zoom.
Missed it.
Right.
that.
I just wanted to understand how
Yeah.
the connection points, and so you're only facilitating the work on site.
The community service.
Community
And then
service.
sometimes I will bring kids, my group will go to teen court and participate as jury.
Oh, I see. Okay, so there is,
and they'll get community service that way as well because it is service to the community.
And the teen court is dealing with lower level offenses, correct?
Diversion.
Correct. They're gonna
Usually
be diversion
I take some
cases.
diversion as well,
Just
but it's
define-
all
wait.
diversion over there
Mm-hmm.
at teen court.
Define diversion.
So a diversion case is going to be a case that is a lower misdemeanor and or a first-time offense. The kid's admitted guilt, et cetera, et cetera.
Diverted away
Out
from the courtroom.
Of court.
What's the age range?
11 to 17, 18. We say
Right.
11 to 17 because they could turn 18 or 19 in our program.
Yeah.
With 100 kids, you really can. You get to know the families. You get to know everyone that you're working with in the community. And we just communicate.
Is it more challenging now? You've been with this program for 20 years. Is it
20-ish.
On the ish side? Is it more challenge? Are the kids more? Is there a tougher exterior about it? Because
Not a tougher exterior, tougher intellect.
here's what I'm wondering, because the knowledge base that kids have today about what's out in the world and what's happening to other kids is so much more vast. They have access to information
Everything.
we didn't have before. At least kids even 20 years ago didn't have. Has that made your jobs harder?
Yes and no. Because now mom and dad usually know where their kids are.
Don't you think there's fewer kids getting in trouble now? I don't know if this is
It's-
true, but I also wonder if the more that people are, I think that the more that people are into like computers, and the less they're outside and the less they're outside
true,
getting
too.
in trouble. The less they're outside running around breaking windows and doing stuff that kids used to do. So there's actually less kids getting in trouble overall.
What are people not seeing or are seeing on the streets because of your program that would be different if your program didn't exist?
A lot of times in the summer, particularly, I will take kids to the park, any area outside that's safe and not close to a road, and we'll pick up trash. And as simple as that seems, it's great for me because they're moving and they're basically using their hunter mind, their hunter instinct, right? Looking for trash. Sometimes they compete a little bit, but every time we're out there like that, people are always like, thank you so much. Thank you to the kids, right? And in any of our locations at Manor or wherever we are, everyone's always, thank you so much.
When are you coming back?
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're doing this. And they'll ask us, what, are you guys some kind of youth group? And I'm always like, yeah, we're a youth group.
try
You
not
know,
to
I never
divulge,
tell them
yeah.
what we are because I always have to keep
kids
that.
can.
The
We
kids
don't.
can if they want, but I just say, yeah, we're a youth group.
Is this court-ordered work often their first paid job they've ever had?
I would say sometimes it is. I would say that's a good observation.
Because I imagine that is their first example, lived example of someone valuing effort they're
their
making.
effort. Exactly. And that's exactly what the way I believe this works, is that not only is somebody else valuing their effort, but the person themselves valuing their own effort, saying, look, I'm doing this because I have to, but at some point, hopefully that's put to the back of their mind. And they're doing it because they actually believe it's helpful to someone. And seeing themselves in that way could possibly be a new path into a different
And in our
life.
outcomes, we definitely talk to the youth when they come in and the parent when they come in and or guardian. And one thing that we are able to track is, or what that you can't track, I'll start with that. What you can't track is when a parent comes in or a youth comes in and they're all bowed up and they're super pissed off.
Yeah.
This is too much time. Why are they doing this? I'm already failing out of school. I'm already in trouble. And I work 3 jobs, me as the parent. So the parent's automatically thinking they're the ones who's in
Or
trouble.
who are being punished.
They're
The
being
parent
punished.
feels
The parent's
punished
being
often.
punished. Within 20 minutes of that intake, with no matter what staff person they're utilizing, you see the body language and the nonverbals, and we're all trained in nonverbals.
That's part of our job, is to put the parent at ease, tell the kid, hey, you're not a
You're
bad
fine.
kid.
You're a fine parent. You're not in trouble, but they've been
Yeah.
to the court counselor. They've been assigned this. They've been assigned mental health. They've been assigned this. And they look like a shitty parent. And they're not. They're not a bad kid. They're not a bad parent.
Yeah, who knows? Whether they are or not, this is a new start.
Yeah, so
This
let's
is a
just
new
start clean. Let's get this relationship rolling. Let's do this. And we give them, like Juan said, we tell them everything in the beginning. So the success then is up to them and the parent. And we see the parent 9 times out of 10, because we leave it up to the kid. They call, they check in, they have to be on time, etc. By the end, the intake questions or parent survey to the end is night and day.
I want to thank my guests today, Karen Peerson and Juan Holladay of Buncombe Alternatives. Our new First Look newsletter gives you just a handful of daily headlines from around the local media landscape to get you on your morning. We also have a weekly newsletter devoted to all things The Overlook that hits you every Friday. Both are free and available at podavl.com/newsletter. Today's conversation happened inside the BB Theater in downtown Asheville, which owners Susan and Giles Collard have been so gracious enough to open to me to record my interviews. Our theme music for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes courtesy of the Asheville band The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. New episodes are available every Monday through Thursday morning. And please support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. I'm Matt Peiken, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook.